And welcome back to KW Property Management and Consulting's Community Association Best Practices monthly webinar series. I'm your host, Tim O'Keefe, an executive director and partner with KW Property Management. As an O'Keefe, I must start today by wishing all of you a very happy St. Patrick's Day. And I'm going to have to start with a joke, okay? So what do you have at home that's Irish, that sits out all night? Patio furniture.
Oh, God. That's bad.
All right, that's my joke for the day. So we'll really get started now, because what we have to deal with is nothing to joke about today. So we've got two great panelists that are going to join me. And so I want to get started. Since our last webinar on February 17th, we've seen the availability of the coronavirus vaccine increase. In Florida, more than 20% of the population has received at least one dose of the vaccine, and 11.4% of the state is fully vaccinated. Now, a state with over 21 million people, that means roughly 5 million people have been vaccinated in some way, shape, or form, and only about half of that fully vaccinated. So we have a long way to go. Since last month, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been approved and is now in distribution as a single dose vaccination. So that should help increase the number of total vaccines over the next 60 days. I personally haven't been vaccinated yet because I figured another 30 to 60 days, it'll be a lot easier. I won't have to sit in line for 3 or 4 hours. Today, we are recognizing the 1-year anniversary since KW held the first industry COVID-19 webinar. We had the idea a year ago that board members and Florida residents will want to know the best protocol being established to protect owners, their staff, and vendors that came on site, in addition to how effectively to maintain and clean a safe environment inside the community association. As tough as 2020 was for all of us, we made it through, and now there seems to have some light at the end of the tunnel. Today, we're going to recap many of the lessons that we learned from a year ago when we didn't really know what we were getting into. As we get started today, please take note of our poll questions. You should be able to see a number of questions that you can answer, and then throughout the webinar today, we will address the answers that provided. Today, we're getting the band back together. Our first webinar held on March 19th last year included the 2 panelists we have today. We approached our discussion a year ago with a lot of questions that we didn't have answers to. Today, we're much more knowledgeable about maintaining properties and the legal and operational impact that COVID has had on all of us. We have much to cover, so let's welcome back our panelists and jump right into our discussion. First, I want to welcome back Donna Berger. Donna's an attorney with Becker Lawyers. Donna's a shareholder and practices law in the state of Florida, throughout the state. She's got clients all over. She's a great attorney, and she's been very proactive in addressing the coronavirus. We're delighted to have you back, Donna. Welcome.
Well, it's great to be back with you and Katalina. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, we have Katalina Cruz, who's been with KW Property Management for over 16 years. Katalina serves as our Chief Operating Officer and has been on this webinar multiple times during the course of the last year. So welcome back, Kat.
Thank you, Tim, and I'm very happy to be here today.
Terrific. So let's just get started, okay? Kat, my first question is going to be for you. When did the news of COVID-19 get our attention last year, and how did KW start to prepare for the spread of the virus?
So Tim, we started getting prepared, and really the first time that we started addressing all of this was in February, towards the end of February of last year. So we started immediately as a company hosting internal meetings. We, for example, had Paul Kaplan, Robert White involved in those meetings. We had Frank Simone, our in-house legal counsel. We had myself, other team members from accounting as well, involved in these calls because we really wanted to gather as much information as possible and then relay that information to our team members and then also to our board members. So we were hosting these COVID calls on a daily basis to really get our hands around the situation, try to obtain as much information as possible. And then from those meetings, we would then host meetings or other calls internally with our vice presidents, district managers, property managers. So that's really how we started to prepare for what we needed to take action on with regards to COVID. Obviously, there was a lot of unknowns. And so we tried to move as quickly as possible. When I kind of reflect back on how we handled everything, looking back at the dates, looking back at emails that we were sending out at the beginning of March, it was by March 17th or 20th that we had already established our protocol, which was really what we were trying to accomplish, that end game of what can we provide to our team members and our board members that are going to help them navigate through this situation. So it was definitely an all hands on deck type of situation here. Everybody participating, everybody helping, everybody contributing and supporting each other through this.
Well, and so we'll spend a lot of time today talking about, so what's happened over the last year and what have we learned from all of this? So we'll come back around to that. But Donna, question for you. When we were thinking about holding our first webinar last year, you were the first attorney that I saw that had addressed and started publishing anything dealing with COVID-19. So what caused you to take note of the virus, and why did you start addressing it so early on?
Tim, it was one of my most active, proactive clients of mine in the Sunny Isles area, picked up the phone and called me. And it was an individual who was returning from overseas and wasn't feeling well, and had told them, I think I might actually have this COVID thing. And the board picked up the phone and called me and said, what's going on with this? This happens to be a community that has a plethora of recreational amenities, elevators that go into the units, but certainly it's a resort type of community. So there was legitimate concern at that point, Tim, that what is this new disease we're hearing about, and what should we be doing as a board in order to contain it? So it really was one of my most proactive clients that got me thinking about it. And you're right, because I put that out internally at Becker. We have almost 40 attorneys statewide, and I was the first one inside the firm saying, like, hey, are you guys hearing about this yet? And nobody had. And then, as we all know on this call and listening, it was like a snowball rolling downhill. Suddenly everybody was talking about it.
Well, it certainly got everybody's attention shortly after we held this first webinar, and sports teams started closing down, and schools started shutting down somewhere between the 12th and the 19th. So I think that really grabbed everybody's attention, and we knew this was real and it needed to be addressed. So Kat, when you look back over the past 12 months, what would you say were the biggest operational challenges of COVID-19?
So looking back, I would say adapting quickly and changing to the needs of the communities during this pandemic. Like we were mentioning earlier, there was crucial triggering events, right? A lot of the emergency orders started to come out, shutdowns started to happen. The safety of residents, the safety of our employees became extremely important. And so during all of the significant events, we had to really respond quickly to that. And I think for our team members on site, they were extremely resilient, but more than anything, very quick to adapt to those changes, right? So that wasn't a challenge, really getting ahead of the situation, of a situation that many of us didn't understand. That was challenging. And then communicating quickly so that everyone had information in order to make decisions. I think that was also very challenging from an operations perspective. For example, getting information out to our employees right away so they knew, okay, do we report to work? Do we not report to work? Are we essential? Are we not essential? How do we stay safe? How do we handle somebody coming up to us and speaking to us, or even putting their hand on our shoulder, right? So communicating to our employees on what actions they needed to take right away, and then communicating the needs of our board members, because our board members now had to make certain decisions regarding amenities, regarding communication, regarding emergency orders. So trying to get information to them quickly enough, and then obviously trying to get information to the residents of what was happening with the community, how were we making changes for the community, and why were we making these changes really to keep them safe. So I think from a communication perspective, it became challenging because you had all of these different parties involved, and it was trying to communicate an effective manner for each group. Enforcement of policies and rules also became challenging. It's still challenging. We still have residents that do not want to wear their masks in common areas. So a lot of our team members, unfortunately, became the COVID police. And we're not treated, or still not being treated very nice by residents that refuse to wear COVID masks or follow protocol in some of the amenities. So that's also challenging. And then the staffing levels. Many of our employees have been impacted by this virus and they've had to take time off. So trying to backfill and trying to have the right levels of staff at all of our properties has also been challenging throughout the pandemic. And even to this day, it's still a challenge that we face. And then trying to get the workforce back in, trying to hire new people into our properties, it's also challenging. We do get feedback from some candidates that, you know, it's better for them to stay at home than to come to work. So I know we're hearing that a lot. And so those are real challenges that we're facing on a daily basis.
So Donna, those are the real life operational challenges that we've dealt with. And I'm sure you share a lot of those same challenges, because I'm sure your clients who are our customers as well, those boards are coming to you and asking, like, what can we do about all these things? So what did you and the Becker firm do to respond to COVID-19 once it was clear that some kind of action needed to start happening in, early March?
Yeah, setting up those communication channels that Katalina just discussed was something we also did with our clients, looking at it from a legal perspective as well. There's a lot of those questions, we feel comfortable with our management professionals with whom we partner on these communities, handling the operational, who's showing up for work, what kind of protocols do we have in place, how do we enforce them? But we had so many legal questions too. What does it mean? Do we have emergency powers? Remember the back and forth? The governor issued a state of emergency in Florida on March 1st, 2020. And there was some question early on as to whether or not that activated emergency powers in Florida, because those emergency powers were originally drafted to address hurricanes and storms and property damage. And this was a whole different ballgame. This was a communicable disease, a pandemic, a global pandemic. And early on, there was question, do these emergency powers kick in? The consensus was yes. And at some point, the division actually weighed in and said, yes, these powers have now been activated. But we went back and forth on that. And if it's activated, what does that mean exactly? And as we talked, and as Katalina also referenced, that we saw shutting down of open houses in communities. So boards no longer wanted to allow these open houses and people to come in when they were selling property. We saw people shutting down pools and gyms and clubhouses. And so we set up a series of webinars and classes for our clients. We did obviously a lot of legal opinions, Tim, for our clients on these issues. We created a lot of protocols. Just what we're doing here, one of the busiest months was right before the beginning of the annual meeting session, when we started doing a lot of Chapter 617 resolutions, which would allow our communities to conduct their meetings electronically, because as you know, the statute doesn't really contemplate that. And most sets of documents didn't really contemplate holding your annual meeting on Zoom. There are bills pending that actually now will clarify things like that will clarify that the emergency powers apply in the event of a pandemic, that you can host your meetings via Zoom, meaning your membership meetings. But those were the type of things, same thing, a lot of education, a lot of enforcement, and frankly, a lot of hand-holding throughout this process, particularly for the newcomers to the board who were not prepared to deal with a pandemic.
So Donna, is the emergency order still in place?
Yes, so the emergency order is still in place until, oh boy, I looked at this, I believe it's the end of April. I think it's at the end of April that the emergency state of emergency is in place. And we've been monitoring that because so far the governor, while we are completely open in Florida, he has wisely chosen to continue to extend that state of emergency, which is extremely helpful because it does allow our boards to continue to utilize emergency powers. And I would suggest that you continue to talk to your council to see which of those powers you can still take advantage of.
And, you know, I just read an article before we started today about a recent interview that the governor of Florida gave. And he's kind of taking a victory lap right now for the fact that the state of Florida is robust, commerce is where it should be. And, you know, so many other states are suffering, but Florida has one of the lowest unemployment rates at 4.8% compared to 10% in California and 8.8% in New York. So, you know, they're kind of pointing back to Florida now as being maybe the model citizen for the way it could have been handled. But then others contest that Florida has an advantage because of the weather in Florida versus the colder states. They may not have been able to, you know, be outside as much, but certainly they're hailing Florida as a state that kind of did it right. But there's still some jury still out on that as well.
And I think we all hope that's the case, that this is a success story. There's still variants to contend with. And I do from the reporting I've read, the climate does play a huge factor in this in terms of the heat, people being outdoors more. But yeah, I think we all agree that if we can count Florida as a success story, that would be great.
And so, Kat, last year in March and April, we saw executive orders that were being released daily, sometimes multiple in a day, and new updates on policies to address COVID-19. Why was the communication so important to our team, board members, and owners during that heavy dose of executive orders coming out?
Yes, Tim, I remember that very clearly. And actually, Frank Simone, our in-house legal counsel, and a lot of the attorneys that we work with so closely were instrumental during that time because it was a confusing time for everybody, right? We had this virus out there that we didn't know what was happening with all of that. And then all the emergency orders, or executive orders, I should say, that were coming from different governments and so on, local government, municipalities, and so on. So we really needed to provide guidance, and I think more than anything, clarification to internal property managers first, right? So they understood what these orders meant, and then sending the information or providing the information to our board members in a clear, concise manner so that they could use the information to help them make decisions. Because a lot of our residents were looking to our board members for guidance. So we tried to help as much as possible, even though a lot of our recommendation to them was also to speak to their legal counsel. We also provided that support in addition to help them navigate through those difficult decisions that they needed to make, whether it was closing the amenities and then the reason why those amenities were being closed. Because I do remember when all of those orders came out, many residents were upset. You know, why is the pool being closed? Why can I not use the gym? I want to open up the gym. I should be allowed to open up the gym. So we had to have those conversations and help support our board members through those difficult times, and more than anything, provide them the information they needed to make those decisions. So it was very important.
And that's a perfect segue, Kat, into a couple of questions I have for Donna, which we've gotten in preparation for today's meeting. We get a lot of questions in advance of the webinar, and Frank from Boca, Sonia from Broward, Frederick from Lake Worth, and Barb from Cocoa all kind of asked the same question around that. So I'm going to turn this around to you, Donna. From they're asking, can associations keep gyms and playgrounds closed? Can boards override the directive by the county to open a pool or a gym? Like what kind of emergency powers do they actually have? What can they use at their disposal? And working in the business judgment rule, I'm sure, is part of that.
Of course. So the local orders, the local executive orders have always represented the floor or the minimum of what your board had to do in order to safeguard the residents. So if your local government issued an executive order that said that, let's say, public and residential swimming pools have to be closed, your board could not violate that order and say, you know what, we feel comfortable opening the pool. So those orders were always the floor, but they weren't the ceiling. So many, remember, we have 67 counties in Florida, and not all of them were as rigid as Palm Beach, Miami-Dade, and Broward County were in terms of issuing these orders. And that's because, frankly, South Florida was the hardest hit with COVID numbers early on, and I think even consistently to today, those are the counties that had the highest infection rates and the highest number of deaths. So throughout the state, though, there were some counties that had very minimal orders, and now, as we know, there are really no orders in terms of closing gyms in shared ownership communities. Yes, I do still have a number of clients, Tim, that have their pool closed, that have their indoor gym closed. And so you may say, why at this point do they still have that? Well, let me tell you why. We're still under a statewide state of emergency. We are still in the midst of a pandemic. There is very little liability associated with keeping your pool closed at this point. There is potential liability with opening it up. Now, if you've had the amenity closed all these months and you're going to open it before the state of emergency is lifted, you have to have a compelling reason why you did so. Opening it after the state of emergency, that could be the triggering event. Okay, governor lifted the state of emergency. Our numbers are trending in the right direction. We've taken the proper steps. We feel comfortable doing this. I do think it's problematic right now for people who've kept it closed the whole time to just suddenly throw it open without managing that. I'm not saying you can't do it, but I think the associations who are keeping amenities closed still at this point, they're doing so because there's almost no upside to opening it. There is potential liability if you do. That's not to say I don't have other clients that have managed this. They've slowly opened it. They have limited hours of operation. They have limited days of operation, and they are strictly enforcing mask mandates. Katalina mentioned having some difficulty with enforcement. We're seeing that in some of our communities too. COVID fatigue has clearly set in, but I will tell you, the virus hasn't gone away. I got an email last night from a client saying, we have a building, we have in one building an active infection. That person was at the pool. What do we need to do in terms of notification? So it's still there, and it means that the potential for liability still exists.
That's a great answer because it addresses a lot of the questions that we got. One of the questions from Barb was that the president of the association won't reopen the clubhouse. They do limit the number of people at the pool and no guests. And she wanted to know if board members can overrule that decision as far as keep getting the clubhouse reopened and adding more people to their pool.
So can the rest of the board override the president, if I'm hearing you correctly?
Yes.
Okay, so this is a revolt is what's in order now. I'm kidding. First of all, it depends on what the documents say, Tim, in terms of the amount of power and authority vested in the president. Typically, the president chairs meetings, the president can set the agenda, but there is often a misconception that the president kind of rules the roost. Unless your board has passed a resolution conveying certain authority to the president to unilaterally set COVID safety protocols, that wouldn't be the case. This would be the decision for the entire board to discuss, hey, do we feel comfortable opening up the clubhouse? Remember, everybody's sitting on the board. Being the president or an officer doesn't give you any more liability, and often it doesn't give you more authority unless your board or your documents have conveyed that authority. So you're kind of all going to sink or swim together. This really does need to be a board decision. And for my presidents out there, I would say this to you. Bringing items to your board and having a full and deliberate board conversation and a full board vote is your safety net, Mr. or Mrs. President. That's your safety net, because you're going to be criticized either way. There are people in these communities that really want everything completely open now, and there are some folks that still feel a little hesitant about doing that. So whichever decision you make, you are subject to criticism, as you know, if you serve on a board, which means it should be, your response is that's the board's decision. I would not want to take that on my own shoulders as any one single member of the board.
And Kat, as the virus started to spread, boards were looking to address many of the issues that came up. How did boards use technology that KW brought to the table to address the virus?
Yes, Tim. So technology definitely has played an important role throughout the pandemic. And the reason for that is we do provide certain features in our technology where they, for example, like a QR code that owners can provide or residents can provide or email to their guests. So when the guests, for example, arrive at the property, they can just show their QR code at the guardhouse, and that will allow then the guests to enter the community. Really what we were striving for is trying to make everything as touchless as possible, trying to minimize the interaction that guests or residents or owners were having with, whether it was gatehouse attendants or front desk attendants, pool attendants. Reservations also became significant part of our software, right? Because we wanted to make sure, especially when we were reopening some of these amenities and setting up sessions for owners to come down and be able to exercise in a safe environment or visit some of the amenities in a safe way. They would, they still actually to this day will reserve the amenity through the app. So for valet, for example, requesting your car so there's no ticket being exchanged, the amenities, like I said, the reservations, having a QR code so that when guests come to the community or arrive at the community, there's less interaction. So those were some of the ways that technology really became important, as well as, of course, using the technology to communicate, to send emails out, e-blasts out to the residents, and so on. So it's really become an important feature in every single community that we manage.
Tim, could I just add to that? I would
Please.
imagine that some of my clients that are now, starting to commence on, capital improvement projects that were put on hold, lobby renovations, they are now looking to do the self-opening doors. So a lot of the lessons we learned, when you think about it, I mean, we hope this will be the last time we ever experience a pandemic, but I don't think we can reasonably expect that to be the case. We learn through every crisis, we learn something, don't we? So now a lot of those clients are saying, you know what? We're going to change our plans. We've learned something from this. Why wouldn't we just do the self-opening door? That was one thing that, one less thing we have to clean if people aren't touching all these handles.
And so Donna, from the technology perspective, one of the questions that we asked in our poll question was, has your community held its annual election on time? And 84% of the people have said yes, 16% said no. So from your perspective, how did technology kind of leap us forward to address things like board meetings, elections, decision-making inside communities?
Yeah, the division, Tim, took a very dim view of associations who claimed we can't hold our election because of COVID. And the answer was, yeah, you kind of can. There's technology out there. And as you saw reflected in your survey, 84% of the associations managed to embrace some form of technology in order to make sure their election happened timely, despite COVID-19. Perhaps they used online voting, which has been a legal option in Florida for several years now. Many used what we're on now, Zoom, or they used WebEx or GoToMeetings. And hopefully it was a collaboration between the board, their management professionals, and legal counsel. How do we do this? I mentioned a few minutes ago about those board resolutions that needed to pass in order to take, kind of flesh out how are we going to do this. Many communities did a very small, if it was a condo or a co-op, a very small in-person component for the purpose of counting the ballots, with the vast majority of people sitting like we are now in their different residences or offices or homes, and logging in. And I will tell you, I've heard from many, many clients, they like the format. They've had greater participation. They've had less aggravation. People seem to behave a little bit better when they know you can mute them. These meetings were not always well attended. And we've had some communities tell us who could never achieve a quorum before, that they've now achieved a quorum in the last year as a result of using technology.
Actually, to piggyback on what Donna was saying, I was having a conversation with a board president last week, and that was exactly what he said, Donna. He said that they will continue to use Zoom for their meetings because they can actually start the meetings promptly. They are more efficient, and they have a lot more participation. So I would agree with that. I think it's been
and an added benefit, Catalina, reduced legal fees because we don't have to drive there.
Well, that was one of my questions for you, Donna, from the pandemic. What's happened to legal fees this past year from the pandemic? So I'll just kind of jump to that since you brought it up.
Well, I would say they're up in some sections and down in other sections. Obviously, early on, and this is such a great look back because I remember when we were all sitting here and we just didn't know what to expect. And now a year later, wow, I don't know that any of us could have predicted it. I will tell you those first couple of months, the number of times our phone rang or we got emails about all of this. Everybody needed information. So I would say that boards that had budgeted very little in terms of legal expenses probably exceeded their legal budget for that. But in other regards, we had reductions, like not going out to meetings, not having to drive, other things. I would say overall, most of our clients probably came in near their legal budget. Some exceeded, but again, one of the things I did recommend is if you're going to create COVID safety protocols, it's not good enough just to create them. You have to enforce them and you have to budget for that. So just saying that we had these protocols in place, God forbid that you did get sued as an association for a COVID related claim, you would have to actually take the second step and say, and this is how we enforce these protocols. So that's where legal fees came in as well. We had great success with emergency injunctions, Tim and Catalina, with regard to people violating COVID safety protocols. And this was months ago when it was really very dangerous. The positivity rate was in Florida up around 10%, and people were understandably concerned. We had an emergency injunction that we used. It was about $5,000, but we only had to do it once or twice in one or two communities, and it solved the problem. We really did not have, after people got that legal letter saying you need to quarantine once we knew they were infected, most people did.
One of the questions that came up today from Delilah and Boca was, has Palm Beach County lifted its pool restrictions?
I have not checked Palm Beach County, but we do as a firm, we kept a 67 county record of where all those different orders were, the various iterations. I want to say that they have now lifted that, but my suggestion to that individual would be contact your association counsel and just confirm, because you should not be operating beneath the floor of any local order.
And Kat, how many, roughly from a percentage standpoint, how many of our properties do you think still have amenities closed? I don't know if it's numbers or a percentage, would you believe, or still have some portion of their amenities closed?
Yes, so I would say probably about 40 to 50% maybe of our community still have some sort of amenity closed. Many of them have opened the amenities with some restrictions, but I would say they may have still a certain amenity closed within the community. Whether it's a meeting room, whether it's the spa, or different areas.
Because I know when I talk to owners and board members, there's still a lot of angst in communities about closures in on some of the amenities. But the reality is, look, everyone's trying to do their very best to keep people safe. And we're only at less than 12% of the population is fully inoculated. So there's still a lot of work that has to get done before I think people start to feel like, all right, we can return to normal. Would you say that?
I was gonna say, Tim, the card rooms in a lot of my communities are the last, those are still across the board, typically closed, even for communities that really kept a lot of amenities open. And I think that was born out of some of the media reporting of transmission in card rooms where people were sitting around tables playing cards.
Well, that seems like a magnet for getting sick, though. You're sitting within 6 feet of each other. There's somebody at every corner of the table, and you're there for longer than 15 minutes. You could be there for a couple hours. So that would seem like a spot where you could really spread the virus quickly there. Donna, there's, there were, based on some of the shutdowns, are you starting to see or having guidance on opening certain amenities? Or we talk about realtors. Are realtors allowing being allowed back in properties to show units?
Yeah, for the most part they are. I still have a lot of communities that frown on the open houses where you've got a lot of people traipsing in and out of the community. But it's funny because now we're in the midst of the legislative session. So session started, let's see, I wrote it down. March 2nd it started, it ends April 30th. It's a 60-day session. We're already starting to see bills that have been filed and are moving through the committee process that address this. One of those bills actually does address, as I said earlier, that emergency powers do apply in the midst of a pandemic, but it does carve out an exemption saying that a board cannot shut off access to the units or the common elements as it pertains to any activities related to leasing or selling units. I find that somewhat problematic. I will tell you, many realtors were able to do virtual showings. As we saw last year, I think the real estate market in Florida had a boom. It's incredibly healthy right now. So closing down for the safety of the residents did not truly have any sort of a negative impact on the ability to sell property. But one of the things that my communities, and what you just referenced, Tim, is kind of like hewing to the middle path, not closing everything, not opening up everything. You're just down the middle. For those communities, they said, fine, you can do a one-on-one showing, no open houses, but we don't want you going to the common elements. If our owners can't go to the pool and can't go in here, we don't want non-owners coming in, wandering around. What's problematic about this proposed bill language is it says that you cannot shut off access to the unit or the common elements. I agree with the unit. I understand that. I'm not sure I agree that in the midst of a pandemic, a realtor should have to be able to take people to visit the common elements. I think you can easily show those online.
Donna, an interesting fact, one of the questions that we asked on our poll questions today was, has your property value gone up in your neighborhood since the pandemic began, in light of the fact that the real estate market's really strong in Florida? And 68% of the respondents said that they have seen an increase in their property values. 9% said no, 23% are unsure. So whatever process they're using to show homes, it's still, I think it's more driven by the demand. I read it, part of the article I read today said there's 1,000 new people moving to Florida every single day right now. So they got to live
You think they're
somewhere.
coming from New York and California?
Yes, they are.
It didn't say where they were all coming from, but I've read other articles that New York and California, Illinois, they're, those big states that have high tax bases, people are starting to leave as quickly as possible and head to the warm weather. So Florida, with the weather we have and the fact that we have no state income tax, and it seems like jobs are available for people, we're starting to see a lot of companies move down. I saw an article last week that about 12 companies from New York are all moving to Florida with high salaries. And there's about 700 people relocating as the corporate headquarters start moving down. So I think it's a good time to be in Florida and try to capitalize on the real estate market.
I've read we're going to get some Michelin-starred New York restaurants down here. That's exciting.
Well, I saw another article that said it's a 2-year wait to get into some of these restaurants that are hot right now. So unless you're a KW client, we got a concierge that can get you in, right, Kat? So Kat, when the pandemic hit, we started hearing about delinquencies escalating. So what's the reality? Like, have we really seen more delinquencies over the course of the last year because people, lost their jobs, haven't been able to pay?
So Tim, that was a big concern. I think a year ago when we had this webinar, we talked a little bit about that, right? From a financial perspective, trying to alert our board members that this may be happening. We immediately started sending out certain reports to our board members with regards to delinquency. We started to track delinquency, and we were very happy to see the results later on, that we didn't really see that huge spike in delinquencies like we were expecting. You did have a couple of communities, I would say more of the high rental communities, that experienced a spike in accounts receivable, but we were able to really help with that right away because we were monitoring it so closely. So I think we really didn't see that increase that we were expecting. We have been really monitoring it very closely, and it's been front of mind throughout the whole year. But we feel as though, most of the communities really have a good handle around their accounts receivable and have been able to, use those cash flows and implement cost savings and all those ideas that I know our value optimization team has been working on. That has been a huge focus, I would say, during the pandemic, is the value optimization. Where can we reduce costs, whether it's with significant contracts, landscaping, and other security contracts, and so on, where we worked hard with our board members and our managers to really help them get some concessions in those contracts. But with accounts receivable, I think we're in a good place there.
And Donna, across your firm, you've got, hundreds and hundreds of associations that you're responsible for. Have you seen a similar effect on the delinquencies this past year?
I would agree with Catalina, Tim. We were bracing for perhaps an onslaught early on when people lost their jobs with their foreclosures. We haven't really seen that, but what we have seen, remember, there's a federal moratorium on foreclosures. So all those federally backed loans, those lenders are not foreclosing. And for some communities, they may be in a stalemate situation where the person is not paying, they're delinquent with the bank, and they're not paying the association, and the lender's not moving forward. It's kind of reminiscent of the Great Recession. And our advice to clients in that regard is don't wait on the bank. We don't know how long the federal moratorium will go on. If someone's not paying, it's much, much easier for the association to proceed with its own foreclosure action than to wait on the bank to do the heavy lifting. Now, if there are banks that own properties in your communities, you can foreclose against HUD. We've actually foreclosed against HUD, believe it or not, and private lending institutions. But no, in terms of just owners, we've had a few come forward that need to be on a payment plan. But you have to understand, for everybody who is suffering and has had a job loss, there are also people that have done very, very well. Unfortunately, in the midst of all this, the grocery industry, retail industry, you've got people who have been incredibly busy. So not everybody has been impacted the same in terms of financial impact due to COVID.
Now, I should have mentioned this when we were talking about the amenities. One of the poll questions was, if your community's opened all of its amenities, only 10% of the respondents in our participation today said that their amenities are reopened as normal. 43% said that they're open with restrictions like wearing masks or limiting occupancy. And then 47% said, no, we have not reopened all of our amenities. So, those of you that may get frustrated that amenities aren't open, you're not alone. There's more non-openings than there are truly back to normal just yet. Maybe, as we get another 90 days, 120 days into the summer, that will start to look a little bit different. One of the other questions that we asked, and Don, I want to come to you with this, is one of the questions is, are you planning to embark on any major projects or capital improvements in your community in 2021? 73% of the respondents said yes, 27% said no. So what can you tell us about contractors coming on site for project work, and what have you seen over the last year?
We've been adding in a special clause, Tim, at least I know I have, I believe most of the attorneys I deal with are doing the same. It's a special clause in the contract. Frankly, I call it a COVID-19 clause, typically added as an addendum. You're not gonna find this language in a boilerplate contract. It's important overall to have your contracts reviewed and amended by legal counsel. But I put language right in there, Tim, that says if the work's gonna take place, if you've got a certain size of the crew, there's certain safety protocols we may want to limit where in the building, depending if it's an indoor project or an outdoor project. We will want to limit, if it's outdoor, we don't want them wandering into the building. If it's an indoor project, we're going to want to map out routes in terms of where they're going to be, what the size of the crew is going to be. In some instances, we've got clients where they do want temperatures taken. You know, most of us, when we go into restaurants now, they do take our temperature. We're going to want masks and facial coverings. So again, if you've got these capital improvement projects, and frankly, that your survey results track with what I said at the outset, that a lot of times now we're seeing these long overdue capital improvement and even maintenance and repair projects that are starting back up. I think overall, there's a greater level of comfort in terms of having contractors come in. I know many of my communities are also now allowing aesthetic renovation projects to take place inside the units. But again, it has to be controlled. There needs to be some guardrails put up in terms of safety protocols.
And Kat, what are you seeing from a practical standpoint inside properties? How are contractors being handled in spite of the pandemic over the last several months?
Yeah, I was going to add to what Donna was saying. Those protocols are extremely important. There is a lot of work. A lot of properties are doing these capital improvements. And so really our team monitoring those contractors, the workers coming into the communities, taking their temperature, and having that constant communication with the general contractor is definitely very, very important. We did have a situation come up this week at one of our properties that has a lot of construction going on right now. So again, definitely making sure that we have all the proper measures in place, proper protocol from the very beginning when these vendors, or the contractors, I should say, are registering into the property, tracking who's coming in, when are they leaving, and all of that is extremely important. And information that you can really track through using our technology. So kind of going back to technology. So yes, we're seeing a lot of activity in a lot of our communities with general contractors and workers.
So that's going to be more and more people are going to be coming on site to do work, I think, over the next several months, because from the conversations we're having, it seems like there's a lot of work that is just getting ready to start. So I think, Donna, you probably saw this too. Last year, there was a fair amount of work that was put off for a year, or 6 months, as people are trying to figure out what they should be doing in their communities.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we actually, one of the few, people keep asking me, we've been talking about lawsuits. Have there been any lawsuits? Actually, one of the suits, and we haven't seen that many yet, and knock wood, we won't, but one of the lawsuits that was filed over the course of the last year was an elderly gentleman in the building who actually sued his association for undertaking some work, and he didn't feel comfortable, and he didn't feel that the association should be allowing that work to take place. He actually lost, but yeah, we're seeing a lot of work that is now coming to the forefront. People, as I said, people have a little bit greater level of comfort with it, but you're gonna wanna know who's on the property. Frankly, in my addendum, I limit the size of the crew to what the board and management feels comfortable with. Do we want 15 people, or do we rather have a smaller crew and have it go over, maybe the time will be extended, but we want a smaller crew? It really is a conversation for the board and management who's right there on site to say, what can we manage? They may want, sometimes contractors want to throw a lot of people on a job and they'll get done earlier, but do you want 15, 20 people? Is that going to be manageable? Or would you have a smaller crew and just say, okay, but we'll have an extra 2 weeks, but we can manage that smaller crew? That's also going to be important for contact tracing in the event that any member of the crew does test positive for COVID-19. We've had that in at least one or two of our communities where a crew did have people test positive, and we did undertake some contact tracing.
And Donna, with all this newness this past year, are you seeing a spike in properties or boards coming to you and asking for their community association documents to be amended? And through that process, what have you learned over the past year that's affected the way you're amending documents today that you might not have done 2 or 3 years ago?
This is such a great question, because yes, we are getting more and more of those requests. And I will say going into summer is when we normally do have boards feel like they can take a break, and now they can look at updating their documents. So summer is when we normally get those requests, but I'm getting 2 big requests. And I'm wondering if you can figure out the first one. The first one is, Donna, can we incorporate a board member code of conduct into our documents? Now, why has this become an issue? Because frankly, there's been some bad behavior over the last year, and it may be a member of the board who was the person who broke into the pool and decided to swim some laps, or a member of the board who knew and really advocated for closing the gym, but then, wanted to allow their good friends to use the gym on the side. So I'm getting a lot of requests for board member code of conduct to be incorporated into the documents because of what we've learned over the last year. We do really want our board members to be the leaders. And how are you a leader? You lead by example. So that's one request. And then the other request is the emergency powers. Rather than having to wait for the state to declare, for the governor to declare a statewide state of emergency, we are putting language into the documents regarding states of emergencies declared by local government. Because as I said, we're 67 counties in Florida. Not every county was impacted the same or equally by COVID, and not every local government responded equally. So why shouldn't emergency powers also be triggered by a local state of emergency? And then lastly, things like short-term rentals. I know KW handles a lot of communities that are in very desirable locations, and you've got short-term renting activity. Can you put into your documents that you can press pause on that kind of activity when you're in the midst of a contagion or a pandemic? And the answer is, as with most things, your source of authority is in your documents or in the statute. So yeah, to answer your question, we're putting a lot of the lessons we've learned over the last year, we're incorporating into document amendments.
All right, Kat, what have we seen from a practical point of view when it comes to COVID code of conduct and handling renters inside communities?
Yes, so actually, we are also getting a lot of requests from our board members to help them develop a code of conduct for the board for the same reasons, right? Maybe there's some behavior that board members don't agree with and so on. So they want to put that code of conduct in place. And we are seeing that across the board everywhere in Florida. So it's not only down here in Miami or Broward, but also Southwest Florida. So there's been a big trend towards that. And then with the short-term rentals, I think that continues to be a challenge. And we do get the feedback from our board members where they do want to make those restrictions and try to stop all short-term rentals. So there's a lot of conversations happening right now with regards to that. I mean, we are also in the midst of spring breakers down here. So that makes the whole situation even a little bit more complicated for our property managers, our front desk attendants, our board members. Everybody wants to preserve the value of their properties. They want people to take care of their property. And so the experience that they're having is, especially with Airbnb, with renters, where they're not taking care of the amenities, they're not taking care of the property, they're treating our employees that a lot of our owners truly appreciate in a very disrespectful manner. So there's a lot of tension, I would say, everywhere with regards to that. And we're getting pretty much the same feedback that Donna was just mentioning in those hot topic areas as well.
Tim, I would just mention with regard to Airbnb, there is a bill pending that would preempt regulation of Airbnb and vacation rentals to the state. And what that means is local governments would not be able to pass ordinances that regulate or prohibit short-term rental activity. I think this was born out of the city of Miami Beach passing a fairly vigorous short-term rental ordinance in order to protect Miami Beach's hotel industry. Right now, that bill contains an exemption for covenants and restrictions in condominium, cooperative, and homeowner association documents. But as with most legislation, that could drop off as these bills wind through the committee process. There are hostile and friendly amendments that are added. We don't know what we're going to be monitoring it. My point being, put that language in your documents now, because once a bill is passed, normally bills cannot be applied retroactively, as it would be an unconstitutional impairment of contractual rights. So better, if you're thinking about this and you think that short-term rental activity might be an issue, now's the time to do it before a bill is passed, which says you can no longer, as an association, pass those type of restrictions.
Donna, is that part of the COVID liability bill that's pending?
No, this is a different bill. This is Senator Diaz's bill. This is a bill that was last year defeated, and it has made a reappearance this year. Thankfully, we spoke to the sponsor last year, Tim. He heard us, and he did exempt association restrictions, and we're hoping it stays in there.
So tell us about the COVID liability bill that is pending then.
The COVID liability bill, okay, that is Committee Substitute House Bill 87 and Senate Bill 72 by Senator Brandes. So this bill would protect business entities from civil liability connected with COVID-19 claims. And the bill includes within the definition of business entities, condominiums, cooperatives, and homeowners associations. So those type of claims would be claims for injury, death, and losses. And I put down the language: it protects against COVID-19 related claim for damages, injury, or death. The defendant, let's assume it's an association, somebody says that their mother never left the unit, never went shopping, but she did go down to the pool that was open and nothing was being cleaned, social distancing wasn't observed. They hire someone. The defendant, in order to be protected under this bill, would have to show that it made a good faith effort to substantially comply with authoritative or government issued health standards or guidance at the time the cause of action accrued. So remember, we talked early on today about the fact that those local executive orders were the floor. So if the local order had said at the time that this person claimed they got sick, was that you could not have that pool open, or you needed to have it cleaned every hour, whatever the order may have contained. If the association was not at least complying with those minimum requirements, then there would not be protection under this potential language. But I think that the genesis for this, quite frankly, is the fact that there is very little coverage for any claims related to communicable diseases, contagion, even pollution. And we're not seeing insurers now writing those policies. If anything, the ones who hadn't tied up those loopholes are now tying up those loopholes at renewal time. So there's no insurance. There's some gap insurance that covers the legal defense bills, Tim, but not that would cover any jury award or settlement award. And why is this important? A lot of times I get, well, how could you possibly prove that? We know we see frivolous slip and fall claims every year. Don't your communities, Katalina, get served with, so-and-so slipped on your stairs. And then you ask the board and they're like, we don't even know this person. Nobody's ever even seen this person in the community. There is no end to frivolous claims. Do we fear that there may be frivolous COVID claims? Potentially. Hopefully there won't be, but we do fear it potentially. So that was the genesis for this bill. It's a step in the right direction. And I'm glad to say that associations are included within the definition of business entities.
And Donna, with the relief package that came out, are you getting a renewal of calls coming in asking if there's government relief for the CARES Act for condominiums and HOAs? And are you hearing more of that?
No, I haven't, Tim. Early on with the PPP money, absolutely. And the SBA loans, and there were all sorts of calls. Can we? And I know the vast majority of associations did not seek that relief. Remember, you had to actually prove that you were impacted and you had a loss. And as we've actually seen, many associations did not have a huge impact on their assessment stream. So no, I'm really not. I would imagine for the associations that have employees directly, we do have some self-managed associations. They have to be careful, and they have to keep abreast of things like the CARES Act and what the policies are in terms of allowing people to take leave, to care for themselves or family members who may be impacted. For those associations, I would say I think the self-managed communities probably have had a much harder go of it this last year, because they have to figure those things out for themselves, as opposed to using professional management, where that's, the management company's job is to keep on top of that.
So we're at the top of the hour, but I do have some questions from the audience that have come in that I want to quickly run through and see if we can get answers for those. I'm going to start with you, Kat. Karen in Naples is asking, are property owners voluntarily reporting that they've had vaccinations? Are they being asked to voluntarily report their vaccination to the community so they can keep a list of who's vaccinated, who isn't?
So Tim, that's actually a very interesting question, because just today I was having a conversation with regards to one of our communities that is considering sending out a survey to their community asking whether they've been vaccinated or not. And so I think that's probably a topic that is definitely going to become an important topic to start having those conversations and determining how we gather that information. I know as a company, we're addressing that, but I think those are conversations that we are definitely going to start having within the communities and what protocol they should follow with regards to that. So as of today, I did have that conversation today, but I'm sure we'll see more and more of those questions being asked.
Okay, so Donna, what can you legally require?
Well, that gives me a little bit of heartburn, because depending on what's being asked, is it a medical record? And now does HIPAA apply? And how are you going to store those records? And is somebody going to feel, who has a religious or a health impediment to being vaccinated, that they're somehow being discriminated against if they answer truthfully and say that they're not vaccinated or they're not going to be? I think this is, a developing area, and I really think we're going to have to put our heads together and figure out what we can legally do, what we can't do. I mean, we have an in-house labor attorney at Becker, and I've reached out to her and picked her brain and even said, can private employers require it? And the answer is yeah, probably, but there's also issues with it. Maybe you encourage everyone to get vaccinated, but maybe you don't delve too deeply. And now, as we're seeing, that there's always going to be an argument. Nothing's ever easy. Then it's going to be, well, what this vaccine has a higher efficacy rate than this vaccine. So you got the bad vaccine, not the good vaccine. And then there's the issue of whether or not these vaccines are going to be effective against all these growing strains. So I do think I haven't been getting that many questions about vaccines, other than communities that were looking to be the pods or the points of distribution. But yeah, this is going to be interesting in the coming months, and I think we're going to have to put our heads together and figure out what associations can legally ask, what they're going to do with that information, whether or not the information provided constitutes a medical record, and whether or not it even makes sense to delve into that territory from an association standpoint.
So one more question for you, Donna, because I want to respect your time. Joanne in Sarasota is asking, with the mask ordinances being lifted, can condo boards keep requiring that masks be worn? So that gets back to the floor and the ceiling kind of discussion we've had.
So I think the answer is a strong yes, and I'll tell you why. Emergency powers are still in effect, and one of the things the emergency powers allows is a board to create an emergency plan. And I have told clients from the beginning, these COVID safety protocols, whether there's, enforced social distancing, limiting the number of people who can get into an elevator at one time, facial coverings outside the unit, put that in your emergency plan. There is no limitation under the statute right now in terms of what can go into the emergency plan. Clearly, there needs to be a logical nexus between what you're saying in that plan and what's going on and the nature of the emergency. But I don't think anybody would dispute right now that there is a logical connection, and there is guidance from the Department of Health and the CDC and the Surgeon General and that mask wearing is one way to prevent transmission of COVID-19. So my answer is a very strong yes, even though the state has said we're not going to do a statewide mask mandate. Just know that plenty of private businesses are also still requiring masks to enter the place of business, and associations can do this under their emergency powers as part of their emergency plan.
And Kat, how easy is it to enforce the wearing of masks? I'm sure that's a topic inside communities, and how do we enforce that?
Yeah, we have some communities that are fining residents that are not following the protocol and not wearing their masks, but it is very difficult and has become difficult to enforce the mask wearing. I mean, we've had confrontation with residents that refuse to wear it. So it is a very difficult situation to enforce.
Donna, under emergency powers, can a board establish a fining system for not wearing masks, even if they don't have a grievance committee process?
No, for that, I would say you still have to comply with the statutory procedure. But just to circle back to what you said, Kat, two things. If you have somebody who's violating the mask mandate inside the community, if there's a way to shut them out, I would shut them out from the pool and the common areas. If they use it, that's one effective, stick. We talk about a carrot and a stick. That's a pretty good stick. Sometimes the person who is violating it, though, doesn't use those amenities, but they do get into the elevator and they go into the mailroom and they put other people at risk. So here's the other thing. What percent, are you talking 1 or 2 people? Or are we talking 20% of the population in the building is not wearing masks? In my communities where they're really having a large percentage of violators, then the discussion needs to be, do we need to start closing down amenities again? And that way you use a little bit of peer pressure where, you've got other people who are getting them in line in terms of, we're going to have to shut everything down if people are not adhering to these safety protocols.
Okay, so I'm going to go real quickly. The vaccine, or the questions that we asked, have you had a vaccine shot yet? 65% of the participants today said yes, 28% said not yet, and 6% don't have any plans of getting one. Communication, we talked about that. This is positive. 83% of the respondents today said they're either extremely efficient or extremely satisfied, or the communication was adequate in their communities. Only 17% didn't think it was adequate. One thought it was extremely inefficient with the way they communicated regarding COVID protocol. And I think we covered the other questions. So one quick question, Donna, from Tony, that's asking, once the emergency powers are over, can they still use Zoom as their primary way of having a board meeting?
Well, board meeting, yes. Membership meeting to be determined, but I do think you need to get with council and amend your documents, again, for the source of authority. Remember, whenever you get pushback on anything, the answer is, where do you have the authority to do that? So if emergency powers are gone, now under 617, you can hold meetings, membership meetings electronically. And we have looked to 617, which is the General Not-for-Profit Act. But get with your legal counsel, see if you can amend your documents to make this, just incorporate this into your long-term protocol, and look to pass that resolution so you can continue to hold Zoom meetings. And you could always do, Tim, as you know, an open conference call. Board members could call in for an open conference call. Frankly, the Zoom is a better way to do this.
Right. So one last question. I'll start with you, Kat. As we wrap up today's discussion, what have you learned? What have we learned in 2020 that we didn't think possible just 9 months ago?
Wow, I think what we learned is definitely how we can quickly adapt to difficult situations, right? Coming together, collaborating, I think has proven that it works. And leaning on each other, I think our workforce has been resilient through all of this. I mean, they've had a very difficult situation to handle, and they really have demonstrated how resilient they are, and also our board members, how supportive they are of our team members, of our company, and just really supporting each other to navigate through this difficult situation. So I would say the collaboration, the support and really the resilience of our team members and our board members has just been incredible during this last year.
Donna, same question for you. What do you think we've accomplished that you never thought possible a year ago?
You know, I think what we've accomplished is helping board members understand just what a critical role they play in the health of their communities. You know, a lot of people, all right, I'll run for the board. Nobody could have anticipated what this past year would have been. But in some cases, I mean, I did have some communities where we had deaths. We had resident deaths. In a few communities, we had deaths of board members. And I think that more than ever, board members took a lot of pride in the fact that the decisions they made and the steps they took made a difference in people's lives. And I also think it underscored how important it is. I think people have understood, the members, the rank and file members, how important it is to get involved with your association. You need to, when it comes to electing people to serve on your boards, you want to elect the people who are up to the task. You want to elect leaders. And I think we learned that. And I think it was a hard lesson to learn, but I think it is a lesson that has resonated.
Great, thank you. We started with my bad St. Patrick's joke and we ended with great information today. So it's really hard to believe that we started these webinars a full year ago, because when you do them all the time, and Donna, you've done a ton of them over the last year, it just one week rolls into the next and it's like, wow, it's Wednesday again, I got to do another webinar. So we appreciate everybody for continuing to support these webinars and coming in, and we had over 430 people register for today. So for those that didn't make it, we'll send you the video of this. For those of you that want to watch it again, it's listed and you can find it at kwpmc.com on our webpage, as well as our YouTube page, our YouTube channel that we have. So I want to sincerely thank our panelists, Donna Berger with Becker Law, Katalina Cruz, the Chief Operating Officer for KW Property Management. Thank you both for joining again. It was great to have you. You guys did an awesome job. So we look forward to having all of you join us again next month for our Best Practices in Community Associations webinar series that will be held on April 21st. So from all of us at KW Property Management Consulting, thank you for making a difference in your community. And remember, we're not out of the woods yet. Please continue to wear your masks, respect social distancing, wash your hands, stay healthy, and happy St. Patrick's Day. Good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.